So we've done WinUI, we've done WPF, we've done WinForms, we've done UWP. So the last one we're going to be working on now is .NET MAUI. So .NET MAUI is a technology for building applications that run on multiple device families. So it'll work on iOS, Android, Tizen, Windows, and it works on Windows using the aforementioned WinUI. .NET MAUI is a new kid on the block. It allows a build once, run anywhere style approach to programming user interfaces. So in terms of Xbox and the Windows desktop, this is the same as the above, as it uses the same WinUI on the Windows side. You also have the choice of using Blazor as a UI framework to build your .NET MAUI apps. This finally frees us from the madness of XAML as a whole and lets us build the UI using standard web patterns and practices. So let's go ahead and let's create a .NET MAUI project. And look at that, .NET MAUI actually supports .NET 8. And there we have it. That's it, our .NET MAUI project is created. We'll build that to make sure it works. Okay, so that built, but for whatever reason, .NET 8 on Android is having some issues. Right, so remember the WinUI that we created before? Well, go in here and I'll get rid of all of this. I'm just going to create a grid and I am going to copy the XAML from WinUI, which is the same XAML in WPF. Just copy this whole thing. And then let's paste it here. And you should at this point immediately see the problem, right? It's giving me all kinds of errors on button context, horizontal alignment, all these different things. Well, why is that? That's because there's a different name for stack panel in .NET MAUI. It's stack layout. And there's a different name for horizontal alignment in .NET MAUI. It's horizontal options and vertical options. That gets us to the baseline, and then you don't use content here, you use text. So we've got the layout for our MAUI app set up now. So let's sling some code. And again, we're going to start by adding a reference to our reference library, right, which we can now switch back to .NET 8 because we don't care about that .NET 7 nonsense. And that means we can switch, we'll have to switch our WinForm package back or WinForms back. And we'll switch our WPF back. Let's get everything back to baseline after wasting all our time with WinUI. And this should continue to build with no problems. Okay, the reason that doesn't build is because there we go. Next, we can add the, and then here, set this as a startup, and we're going to be running it on this Windows machine. And when we're running it on this Windows machine, we're actually using WinUI. And here it is. If I click on count, it totally works. So isn't it kind of hilarious that WinUI by itself does not support .NET 8, but if you use .NET MAUI, which uses WinUI as the renderer when you're on Windows machines, then you can actually use .NET 8. Now, .NET MAUI has another mode of rendering user interfaces that gets us far away from the world of XAML into the more consistent and well thought out Blazor. You still face any issues associated with publishing your app for specific targets like Windows, but as far as developing your app user interface, you'll have the benefit of working with Blazor, HTML, and even CSS and JavaScript to ensure some measure of consistency. Let's look at how that works. So we'll start out by cleaning this up a bit. So our MAUI sample goes in there, and we'll now create another MAUI sample, and this time it'll be MAUI Blazor. So it's .NET MAUI Blazor Hybrid app. Now, if you watched our previous video on Blazor, you would know how this is all set up. If you haven't, please go and look that up. Blazor is a powerful user interface builder and web application builder. It's amazing, it's easy to use. So everything that we need to work on in terms of UI is going to be inside of this components folder, where basically our pages are, and here's all the pages that we're going to be working with. You also have our layout, which again, if you watched our previous video, you'll understand what that's about. So go watch it if you haven't already seen it. And then in the dub root, we have all our styling and the HTML page. That's basically the host page where Blazor is run from. So to get going, we add our code tag in here. And of course, we're going to add a reference to our reference library project, as always. And I'm going to add a button here. And we'll do things a little bit differently since we are in here. Actually, we'll make it just a heading. And then over here, we're going to connect to that on-click handler that we just created. Let's see. And in here, we're just going to, well, let's go over to the imports. So we're going to import add a using for just reference library. So in here we can then say reference class dot increment, and that will be set to count. So basically, every time it's incremented, it sets the count, that changes the count. And in here, we are going to have count specified. And just for good measure, I'm going to make sure that I let the UI know that the state has changed. Even though usually every single time you click on an event, like a button, anything like that, the state change event is triggered. But just to show what's actually happening, because in some instances it's not, so you should know that this method is necessary for that to happen. So I'll set this at the startup, and we will run this again. Now there's going to be quite a bit of boilerplate here that we don't need. Actually, there's already a counter here. So before we move forward, let's actually go in and just clean it up a bit. In the main layout, we're not going to need this nav menu piece. And we are also not going to need the about piece. Let's make the page as simple as possible. Let's run this again. We should have a much cleaner page now. There we go. And so if I click on the click me, as you can see, it's being updated. And we basically have the same functionality, same capability as when we use XAML, but now we're using HTML, which is more consistent. There's only one. There's only one. There's only one dialect of HTML. There's only one HTML. If you use a button, it always works the same. Nobody's come out with their own version of button that has different properties than the button that's in the browser on your phone, or the browser on your watch, or the browser on your Xbox, or the browser anywhere else. So .NET MAUI Blazor is a great way to use a standardized UI without the craziness of XAML and all that entails. So you just learn HTML or no HTML, and now you can be a web developer, you can be a mobile app developer, and you can even be a desktop developer, all using one UI framework and technology. The final technology we're going to be talking about here is Blazor WebAssembly, which brings it all home by leaving the desktop entirely. It solves the problem of deployment that we've been having all this while. There's no need for an app store. It solves the problem of XAML. It can be run on the Xbox through the included browser. And in the future, we may even be able to install the site as a progressive app directly to the Xbox dashboard. And finally, it follows the aforementioned web-based patterns and practices. When you're using Blazor WebAssembly, there's one standard, one way to do it, no matter what device you're on. HTML has one dialect, and as long as you know how to define a button or a checkbox or a text box, any browser out there will be able to render it. Let's take a look. So we'll start out by once again cleaning up the workspace and then adding a new folder for it. And in here we add our Blazor WebAssembly project. Now you have the choice to do this as a Blazor web app or to actually create a Blazor WebAssembly standalone app. And in this case, I'm going to use the standalone app because everything that's going to be published is basically going to be WebAssembly. We're also going to set this up as being progressive. and then we can build this. Next, we add a reference to our project, which should continue to work, our reference library. And to illustrate the seamlessness of this, I'm actually going to copy the code right from here. And that is what we're going to use over here. And then of course, we need to add a reference to reference library. So that is all set, and we should be able to run this now. And there's our application that we can click to add numbers. Next, let's fix the layout. We won't be needing nav menu, of course. And in the main layout, we don't need that. And we of course don't need that, just so it looks essentially the same. Running it now, works perfectly fine. So then we can actually, because we've set it up as progressive, we can install the application actually to our device. And there's the installed application. Now you notice there's no browser or anything like that. It all just works. Next thing we'll do with this is we're actually going to publish it to Azure. So we finish off. So that was successfully created, and now we actually have to publish our code from our local machine to that environment. All right, and it looks like that is published now. And that's it right there. So what we can now do is go to tinyURL. And we'll paste this and get a much shorter URL for it. Yeah, we got it. So that we can use this to access it. So now what we're going to do is go to the Xbox and access that URL from the Xbox and see if everything still works there. So here's our game running on the Xbox console. And you can tell it's the Xbox console because I can click that on it. It's basically the Edge browser on Xbox. And as you can see, I'm actually updating the number. So as you might imagine, this could be any game or technology actually working on the browser, running on the browser without an issue. Now, one thing you'll notice is that when we run this application locally, we get the option to install the application. However, when we run this on the cloud, that option does not exist. Even though everything works, if we actually look at it, you'll see that the manifest.web manifest file that basically needs to be served down to the client in order for it to recognize it as a progressive web app is being blocked. This is because by default, this manifest file is not something that the app service in Azure serves. So let's go ahead and let's change that. You can go to portal.azure.com and we will find our app service. And then if you scroll down, you should see something that says the app service editor. So you click on that and then it's going to actually open up the editor for us. And to add this as a MIME type, we actually have to go into the web config and actually add it in this section where static content is specified. And we can specify, well, let's go ahead and let's just copy one that already exists. Paste it there. And then if you look at our actual document, the manifest.web manifest, it's just a JSON file. So the format is going to be JSON. It's just that it's being served as a different file name. So we're going to keep that as application JSON, but we're going to change it to .web manifest and save that. And then we can close out of that. And if we refresh this, you now see that on the server side, we're seeing this thing to install Blazor WebAssembly. And we can actually even keep this in the dock. And essentially, it will be treated like any other Mac-based application. Sadly for the Xbox, this capability is not yet available. So you'll have to essentially continue to either navigate to the site or set it as a favorite. And then when you open up the browser, you can basically use your favorites to get to it. But I'm sure at some point, Microsoft, you got to make this happen for us. Stay tuned to this channel for future updates. We'll be giving away you heard it, two Surface laptops when we hit 50,000 subscribers. So please like, share, subscribe to help us get to that point. Happy coding and have a blessed day.